I never thought I'd find myself dangling 40 feet above a jungle canopy, heart pounding not because of the height, but because the guy next to me wouldn't let go. Seriously, there we were. Me and this guy, the first, barely knew, strapped into harnesses on the last zipline of the entire tour, and he's gripping my hand like he's afraid I'm going to disappear midair. It was kind of hilarious and totally terrifying all at once. So let me back up a bit. I was in Costa Rica for a week, mostly just to get away from the usual grind. My friend had dragged me along. He's this outdoorsy type who lives for adrenaline, and I'm more of the let's have a margarita by the pool kind of guy. But hey, I figured when in Costa Rica, might as well try the zipline tour thing, right? It sounded like a fun way to see the rainforest from a different angle, and I was hoping it'd be a decent story to tell later. The group was larger at the start, 10 or so people, all buzzing with excitement and nerves. Among them was this guy who caught my attention immediately, Ethan. He had this easy smile that didn't look like he was trying too hard, and eyes that were more intense than I expected for someone who seemed so chill. I remember noticing that he wasn't really like the rest of the group, who were more about selfies and chatting. Ethan was quiet but present, like he was taking everything in, and every now and then, our eyes would meet and hold just a second longer than normal. As the tour went on, everyone started peeling off, either because they were too scared or just because they wanted to take it slow. By the time we got to the last zipline, it was just me and Ethan left. We'd already been through the course, laughing at each other's terrified faces, sharing stories about travel and life while waiting our turns. I was surprised at how easy it was to talk to him, like picking up on the same wavelength without even trying. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The last zipline was the longest and the highest, stretching across a huge open part of the canopy. The guide was all about safety, making sure we had the ropes and harnesses tight, but when it was time to launch, I could tell Ethan was a little off. His usual calmness was replaced by this nervous energy. When I finally stepped onto the platform and looked at him, he reached out and grabbed my hand, holding on like he wasn't ready to let go. At first, I thought maybe he was joking, or maybe just needed a moment of support. But then it hit me. There was something more in his grip, something that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Like that tiny touch was saying, "Don't disappear, stay here with me." And just like that, the line between just friends and something else blurred, right there midair, with the jungle roaring all around and the sunset painting everything gold. But we still had to let go and fly forward, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes the scariest things aren't the heights or the risk of falling. Sometimes, it's the feeling of wanting to hold on when you're supposed to let go. And that night, hanging over the Costa Rican jungle with Ethan's hand in mine, I realized I was caught somewhere right between fear and hope. I could feel his fingers tightening around mine, like he was afraid that if he loosened his grip, I'd vanish into thin air, or maybe just disappear from his life entirely. It threw me off because normally I'm the one who holds back, keeps things safe and distant. But right then, hanging on that platform with the wind brushing past us, I wanted to squeeze his hand back just as hard. The guide gave us that ready-to-go nod, and I finally had to say, "You okay?" My voice came out softer than I intended, but I needed to hear him say something. Ethan looked at me, a little breathless, like he wasn't sure how to explain what was going on. Then, with this weird half-smile, he admitted, "Honestly, I'm kind of terrified. Not of the zip line, but this." He gestured vaguely between us. "I don't know why I'm holding your hand like this, but it feels like the only thing keeping me grounded." I blinked. Grounded? Yeah. You know when you're about to jump into something, and your brain's screaming at you to stop, but your heart's already halfway there? He gave me a small shrug. That. I wasn't expecting that kind of honesty, especially from someone who'd been so chill all day. There was a rawness in his voice, like he was dropping a layer he usually kept hidden, and it caught me off guard, in a good way. I squeezed his hand, hoping my own nerves didn't show. "I get that. It's weird, but I'm glad it's you here with me." There was a pause, and then the guide gave us a countdown. 3, 2, 1, go. Suddenly, we were flying. the world blurred around us, the treetops rushing past, the wind whipping against my face. But the grip between us stayed solid. Ethan's fingers didn't loosen. If anything, they seemed to dig in tighter, and I didn't want to pull away. When we reached the landing platform, the rush of adrenaline was almost overpowering. We unhooked ourselves, and I could see the flush in his cheeks, the wild gleam in his eyes. "You didn't let go," I said, half laughing, half amazed. "Yeah, I guess I didn't," he replied, voice a little breathless. "Maybe I didn't want to." And just like that, the easy wall between us cracked wide open. We walked back to where the group was gathering, but it felt like we were in our own little bubble. The jungle noises, the chatter from the others, it all faded into the background. On the way, Ethan said, "You know, I wasn't planning on doing this trip alone. I came with a friend, but he bailed last minute, so I was kind of dragging myself through it." I raised an eyebrow. "Ouch. So, you're a solo act this trip?" He shrugged, but there was a hint of something more beneath it, like maybe he didn't want to talk about it. "That's rough," I said. "I came with a friend too, but he's more about the beach and rum than adrenaline. So here I am, stuck with a bunch of strangers and a zipline that nearly did me in." He laughed, a sound that felt warm and easy. "Well, I'm glad you were stuck with me. I don't think I could have done the last line without you." That caught me off guard again. Not because I didn't think Ethan was adorable, but because I realized how rare it was to find someone who could be honest about their fears and still hold your hand through it. Later, as we walked back toward the lodge, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows and painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The jungle was alive with evening sounds, the chirping of crickets, rustling leaves. Everything felt surreal and perfect at the same time. We stopped by this little clearing where the guide said we could catch a better view. Ethan leaned against a tree, still catching his breath. "You know," I said, "I never thought I'd say this, but I think that was the most fun I've ever had on a zipline, even though I was scared out of my mind." He looked at me, eyes glinting. "Me too, but maybe it wasn't just the zipline." I smiled, feeling this strange flutter in my chest. "What do you mean?" He took a step closer, still holding on to that mischievous smile. "I mean, I think I was more scared of letting go than of flying through the air. I felt my breath catch. Letting go of what? Of this moment. Of you." He didn't say it outright, but the way he looked at me made it clear. For a second, everything was quiet except for our breathing. Then, impulsively, I reached out and took his hand again. "Maybe we don't have to let go just yet," I said, feeling more confident than I thought I could. He squeezed my hand tight, that same way he did back on the platform. And I knew, whatever this was, it was just beginning. We stood there for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the jungle growing darker around us. And in that fading light, with his hand in mine, I realized something important. Sometimes, the scariest leaps lead to the best landings. I'm still not sure where this goes from here, but one thing's for sure. I don't want to let go. We stood there for a while longer, the sky shifting from amber to deep indigo as stars began to sprinkle overhead. Ethan didn't let go of my hand. Not once. It felt like a lifeline, but also something electric, like the start of something neither of us knew how to name yet. Finally, we turned away from the view and started walking back toward the lodge. The trail was narrower now, and the jungle seemed to close in around us with a soft, humid night breath. The other tour members had already scattered or gone ahead, so it was just the two of us, the crunch of our footsteps against dirt the only soundtrack. So I said, trying to keep my tone casual even though my mind was racing, "What happens now? Are we, like zipline buddies for life?" Ethan chuckled, but there was a vulnerability in his smile. "I don't know. Honestly, I haven't felt this connected to someone in a long time. Maybe ever." That hit me harder than I expected. I've been around the block enough times to know it's rare when a connection feels this immediate and raw. Usually it's slow burn or awkward fumbling before anything clicks. But with Ethan, it was like stepping into a pool of cold water and realizing it was just what you needed. "So you're saying this is more than just a one-off adrenaline high?" I teased. "I guess I am," he said, looking down at our intertwined hands. "There's something about sharing fear and excitement that strips away all the usual bullshit." I nodded, feeling my heart thumping in my chest. "Yeah, It's weird how the scariest moments can bring out the most real parts of us. We reached the lodge, a cozy wooden structure surrounded by flickering tiki torches and the faint hum of music from the bar. People were winding down, some chatting, others nursing drinks. The night felt alive but intimate, like the whole place was holding its breath. Ethan glanced around, then pulled me toward a quieter corner near the bar. Want to grab a drink? Something tells me a cold beer might help me process the fact that I just held a stranger's hand mid-zipline. I laughed. Stranger? You're not a stranger anymore, dude. He smirked and flagged down a waiter for 2 cold cervezas. We found a small table, and as we sat, the tension between us shifted. It was no longer just the thrill of the zipline, but this new, delicate thing growing in the spaces between our conversation. So, I said, swirling the beer in my glass, "What's your story, Ethan? You said your friend bailed on this trip. Anything you want to share?" He sighed, taking a slow sip. "It's complicated. He's someone I've known for a while, but we drifted apart. Not in a bad way. Just life happened. I guess I thought this trip might help me figure things out, find some clarity. But honestly, I wasn't expecting to meet anyone like you." My chest tightened again. I wasn't expecting it either. We talked for what felt like hours, swapping stories about our lives, work, family, messy breakups, dreams we were too scared to chase. There was an honesty between us that felt rare, like we were both peeling back layers without fear of judgment. At one point, Ethan said, "I've been so guarded for so long. Part of me didn't want to open up to someone new because it felt like tempting fate to get hurt again." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. I get that. Taking a chance on someone can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff, but sometimes the fall is worth it. His eyes softened and he squeezed my hand back. Maybe this fall is exactly what I needed. We sat there, the noise of the bar fading into a comfortable backdrop. In that moment, I realized how much I wanted to see where this could go. Beyond the zipline, beyond the trip, beyond the fleeting. Later, as the night wore on, we wandered outside to the veranda, where soft lantern light cast gentle shadows. The air was cooler now, and the jungle around us seemed to hum with life. Ethan pulled me close, and for a second, everything else just disappeared. "Can I be honest?" he asked, voice low. "Always," I replied. "I don't want this to end when we leave this place. I want to see you again. I want to know what this is." My heart was pounding, but my answer was simple. "Me too." He smiled, that same easy grin from earlier, but deeper somehow, filled with hope. We leaned in, the world narrowing until it was just the two of us. A quiet, electric connection that felt like both a beginning and a promise. As our lips met, I thought about how strange life can be. That sometimes, the last moment on a zipline tour turns out to be the first step into something real. And for once, I wasn't scared to hold on. That kiss felt like the calm after a storm. Unexpected, but somehow exactly what I needed. When we pulled apart, the world seemed a little quieter, the night air cooler, and the jungle sounds softened to a gentle hum. I caught Ethan's eye, and there was something unspoken between us, like the night had shifted into a new chapter without us even realizing it. We stayed out on the veranda, leaning against the railing, just talking about nothing and everything. I told him about my job, how I was stuck in a routine I didn't love, how I'd been craving something different, but wasn't sure what that looked like. He shared stories about growing up in a small town, about the moments that made him who he was, and the times he'd felt lost. There's something about late-night conversations that make you feel like you're peeling back layers you didn't know you had. And for once, I wasn't hiding behind jokes or sarcasm. I felt raw, real, and strangely comfortable with him. At one point, Ethan looked out over the dark canopy, the moonlight casting silver shadows on the leaves. You ever feel like life's just waiting for something to pull you forward? Like you're stuck on a ledge and you're too scared to jump, but also too scared to stay? I nodded. "Yeah, I think that's why I took this trip, to find the courage to jump." He smiled softly. Guess we both needed a little push. The next morning, we woke up to the sounds of birds and the smell of coffee brewing in the lodge. Neither of us mentioned the kiss from the night before, but there was a new energy between us, something that hovered just beneath the surface. The tour had one last stop, a small waterfall hidden deep in the jungle, where we could swim and cool off. We joined the rest of the group, but I found myself sticking close to Ethan, matching his pace as we hiked through the thick foliage. When we reached the waterfall, the water was icy cold, rushing over smooth rocks into a crystal clear pool. Ethan jumped in first, splashing water toward me with a grin. I laughed and dove in after him, the shock of the cold water making me gasp. We swam together, the tension from the night before melting away in the rush of the waterfall. When we climbed out, sitting on sun-warmed rocks, I felt closer to him than ever. Last night was unexpected, I said, shaking water from my hair. He nodded. Yeah, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I want to see where this goes. I smiled. Me too. We spent the rest of the day exploring, sharing snacks, and joking like old friends. But beneath the easy banter, I could feel the undercurrent of something deeper, something neither of us was ready to name out loud yet. That night, we sat on the veranda again, the jungle alive with crickets and distant calls. Ethan pulled out his phone and showed me pictures from his trip, photos of quiet beaches, mountain trails, and the little things that made him smile. I want to remember this, he said softly. Not just the places, but you. My heart skipped. You're pretty unforgettable yourself. He grinned, and I reached across the table, fingers brushing his. The contact sent a jolt through me, and without thinking, I took his hand. Can I ask you something? I said, anything. Would you want to maybe hang out after this? When we're back home? His eyes searched mine for a moment, then he nodded. Yes, I want that. I want to see where this goes. It felt like the first time I was really saying yes to something that scared me, but also excited me. The kind of yes that could change everything. Over the next couple of days, we kept slipping into a rhythm. Morning hikes, afternoon swims, evenings filled with long talks and quiet touches. We weren't rushing anything, but every glance, every smile, every touch seemed to write a new line in our story. The day before I was set to leave, we went on a final hike to a lookout point that overlooked the entire valley. The view is breathtaking. Rolling hills, dense jungle, and a sky so wide it felt like you could see forever. We sat side by side on a rock, shoulders touching, the silence between us comfortable. I'm going to miss this, Ethan said after a while. Me too. He turned to me, eyes serious. But I don't want this to be the end. I want to keep seeing you, even if it's hard with the distance. I swallowed hard. The reality of leaving was settling in, but his words gave me hope. Distance is scary, but maybe it's worth it. He smiled, the kind of smile that makes you believe in possibilities. Then let's make it worth it. We kissed again, slower this time, like promising we'd try. On the plane ride home, I kept replaying the last few days in my head. The fear, the adrenaline, the connection. I didn't know how things would pan out, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take a risk. Sometimes, the last two on a zipline tour end up holding onto something more than just a hand. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real adventure begins. Back home, the quiet hum of my apartment felt almost too ordinary after the wild colors and sounds of Costa Rica. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting a message from Ethan, hoping the magic we'd found wasn't just a vacation illusion. And then, there it was, his name lighting up my screen, simple and unpretentious. Hey, just landed. Survived the flight, more or less. It grinned like an idiot and fired back. Welcome back to reality. So far, it's missing the jungle soundtrack and your terrible puns. Within minutes, we were texting in bursts, snapshots of our different worlds, little inside jokes that made the distance feel a little smaller. It was strange and thrilling to build something over pixels and screens, but also exhausting. Long days at work, different time zones, the awkward pauses in conversation that make you wonder if you're reading too much into a single emoji. One Friday evening, after a brutal week of deadlines and meetings, Ethan called. Hearing his voice was like a rush of fresh air. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. Music, books, what we ate that day, the kind of mundane details that somehow felt intimate. "I miss you," he said suddenly, and I could hear the quiet vulnerability behind the words. "Same," I admitted. "This distance thing, way harder than that zipline drop." He laughed softly. "Yeah, but hey, if we survived dangling 40 feet over a jungle, we can survive this." That line stuck with me. It was ridiculous, but true. We'd taken a leap together, and now it was about holding on through the long fall. A few weeks later, Ethan surprised me with a weekend visit. I was nervous, excitement knotting in my stomach as I waited at the airport. When he finally emerged from the gate, tired but smiling, I felt something shift, like all the uncertainty condensed into that one moment. We spent the weekend wandering the city, showing each other our favorite spots, him dragging me to a hole-in-the-wall coffee shop with the best espresso I'd ever tasted, me taking him to my go-to pizza place. It was easy, natural, like we'd known each other longer than a few weeks. One night, after a lazy dinner, we found ourselves curled up on my couch, the kind of comfortable silence that only happens when you're with someone who just fits. Ethan turned to me, eyes serious. "I've been thinking about us, about what this means." I nodded, heart pounding. "Me too. What if we tried making this real? Not just weekends and texts, but a real thing. I can move here, or you could move there. We figure it out." The idea was terrifying, uprooting lives, risking everything. But hearing him say it made it feel possible. "I want that," I said quietly. "I want us." He smiled, reached out, and tucked a stray hair behind my ear. Me too. The next few months were a whirlwind. Job talks, apartment hunting, late-night planning sessions. It wasn't easy. There were doubts, fears, moments where the weight of it all felt like too much. But through it, Ethan was my anchor. He reminded me of that day on the zipline, how fear and excitement mingled, how holding on could lead to something unexpected and wonderful. One morning, after a restless night spent changing flights and deadlines, I woke up to a message. "Got the job. Can start next month. Looks like we're doing this." I stared at the screen, heart racing. That afternoon, Ethan showed up at my door with a goofy grin and a small suitcase. "Ready for the next zipline adventure?" he joked. I laughed and pulled him inside. "Let's do it." We still talk about that trip like it was a lifetime ago. The fear, the thrill, the moment he wouldn't let go of my hand. It's a story we tell with smiles now, a reminder that sometimes the scariest moments lead to the greatest leaps. And honestly, I'm glad he held on, because letting go would have meant missing out on everything that came after. Moving Ethan in wasn't as simple as just tossing his suitcase in the corner and calling it a day. There were boxes everywhere, half-assembled shelves, and a lot of laughter over the ridiculous amount of mismatched coffee mugs we had between us. But despite the chaos, or maybe because of it, the apartment started to feel like home. The kind of place where two lives are messy and intertwined, but somehow just right. The first night we officially lived together, we sat on the couch, exhausted and surrounded by scattered clothes and unopened boxes. Ethan grabbed my hand, that familiar grip that still sent a jolt through me, and said, "You know, I was terrified of this, of moving, of the unknown, but now that we're here, it feels right." I smiled, brushing a thumb over his knuckles. I was scared too, but I think some fears are worth facing. Days turned into weeks, and we settled into a rhythm. Morning coffees made together, lazy Sunday brunches trying to figure out whose turn it was to do the dishes without starting a war. But beneath the everyday stuff, there was this underlying nervous energy. Like we both knew how fragile new relationships could be, especially when they started with so much distance. One evening, a few weeks after Ethan moved in, I came home late from work, drained and irritable. Ethan was waiting in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and humming softly. When he saw me, his smile faltered a bit. "Rough day?" he asked, setting down the knife. "You could say that," I admitted, collapsing onto the couch. He joined me, handing over a glass of water and sitting close enough that I could feel his warmth. "Want to talk about it?" I hesitated. Normally, I'd just shrug off stress, keep it to myself. But Ethan had this way of making me want to share, even the messy parts. It's just everything piling up at work. Deadlines, expectations. Sometimes I wonder if I'm cut out for this. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I get that. Moving here was a leap for me too. Sometimes I question if I made the right choice. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that wasn't awkward but necessary. Hey, Ethan finally said, turning to look at me. We survived the zipline. We can survive this too. Together. I smiled, feeling some of the tension ease. Thanks, man. I needed that. As weeks passed, those moments became our little anchors. When life got overwhelming, we found strength in each other's presence. Our relationship wasn't perfect. There were misunderstandings, times when our different habits clashed, but there was always a willingness to listen, to keep holding on. One weekend, we decided to escape the city for a hike not far from home. It wasn't the jungle canopy of Costa Rica, but the fresh air and quiet woods were a balm. About halfway up the trail, we paused at a clearing with a view of rolling hills and the city skyline in the distance. Ethan pulled me close, his eyes searching mine. Remember when we were hanging above that jungle and I didn't want to let go? I nodded, heart swelling. Well, he said with a grin, I still don't want to let go. Not now, not ever. I laughed, reaching for his hand. Good, because I'm holding on tight. That evening, back at the apartment, we cooked dinner side by side, the familiar clatter of pots and pans filling the room. It felt like a milestone, not just living together, but choosing each other every day. Lying in bed that night, I thought about how far we'd come from that shaky platform in Costa Rica. From strangers to partners, from fear to trust. I don't know what's next for us, and maybe that's the beauty of it. Life's a series of leaps, some terrifying, some exhilarating. But with Ethan by my side, I feel ready for whatever comes. Because sometimes, holding on is the bravest thing you can do, and the best adventure you'll ever have. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything finally settled into place. Not with some grand gesture or dramatic moment, but in the simple, everyday way that felt like a promise. Ethan and I were sitting on the small balcony of our apartment, sunlight filtering through the leaves of the fig tree outside, a slow breeze carrying the faint scent of rain. We had just finished making lunch together. Nothing fancy, just pasta with a sauce we'd both learned to tweak over time. And now we were nursing mugs of coffee, the comfortable silence stretching between us like a warm blanket. I glanced over at him, watching the way the light caught the edges of his hair, the soft curve of his smile as he looked out over the city. It struck me how much had changed since that day in Costa Rica, when he'd gripped my hand on the zipline, holding on like he didn't want to let go. Back then, I thought that touch was just about fear and adrenaline. But now I understood. It was about connection. Trust. Choosing someone when everything else felt uncertain. I started, my voice low, about how that moment changed everything. Ethan turned to me, eyes curious. Not just the zipline. I said, but how you held my hand, how that small thing made me realize I wanted to take a chance. On you, on us. He smiled, a little shy but full of warmth. I'm glad you didn't let go. I reached out, fingers finding his, and squeezed gently. Me too. For a moment, we just sat there, hands entwined, feeling the steady beat of something real between us. Do you ever think about how life's weird like that? Ethan asked. How the scariest moments can lead to the best things. Yeah, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. I think that's the biggest lesson here. Sometimes you have to leap, even when you're terrified, because the landing might just surprise you. We stayed like that for a while, watching the clouds drift, the city humming softly below. No promises made aloud, no grand declarations. Just two people who chose to hold on, day after day, in the quiet ways that matter most. And in that peaceful certainty, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Because some stories aren't about fireworks or perfect endings. They're about the small moments of courage and trust, the hands that reach out in the dark, and the quiet decision to stay. I don't know what the future holds for Ethan and me. Maybe there will be more zipline leaps, more uncertainties to face. But now, I know I'm not alone. And that, more than anything, feels like home.